When you think of nutrition for athletes, usually we think of things like calories, protein, carbs, and sports supplements. The mention of fiber, fruits, and vegetables often gets relegated to the realm of a doctor or a parent or some other authoritative figure trying to encourage you to eat more. And you might see them as something that you know is good for you, but you might not fully appreciate what that means and the impact that it can have. And because of this lack of clarity, you may not end up putting as much focus on eating sufficient fiber as you would on other elements of nutrition, like hitting your calorie and macronutrient targets, for example. And the aim of this episode is to give you that clarity and hopefully some encouragement by providing a concrete idea of what fiber is, why it can help you as an athlete, and how to go about actually improving your intake. So the first thing is a definition there. Fiber refers to the part of the plant foods that are technically indigestible to us as humans, and because it's indigestible, it passes through most of our digestive system. Then it reaches the large intestine, where the majority of our gut microbiome resides. And the word microbiome here refers to the community of living microorganisms, for example, bacteria, that reside in the gut. Now, as I've mentioned, we can't digest that fiber, but the microorganisms here can. Technically, they ferment the fiber, but we can easily think of this as them consuming the fiber, using it as energy, and excreting waste products from it. What are waste products to them are extremely beneficial to us. These waste products are known as short-chain fatty acids. These short-chain fatty acids are associated with a range of health improvements in the human body, which we'll get to later. This type of fiber that we are speaking about so far, the type that we can't digest but that the gut bacteria can, is known as soluble fiber. Soluble here refers to the fact that if you were to put it in water, it would dissolve, break down, or mix with the water. The other type of fiber, insoluble fiber, doesn't dissolve in water in this way. And this type of fiber can't be digested even by the gut microbiota. So whilst it breaks down somewhat mechanically through chewing and passing through the gut, the fiber structure itself remains solid. And this fiber then mixes with the rest of our food, bulking it up as it passes through the digestive system, and it completely passes through. And this isn't a bad thing at all. For one, it slows down the digestion process, which is beneficial at times, albeit not at others, which we'll get to later. It also forms the bulk of our feces so that without sufficient amounts of it, we don't have the necessary bulk to signal the need for us to use the toilet, which leads to potential problems that we'll also discuss later. So we want to get into why fiber is so important for athletes, because we've established that fiber feeds the gut bacteria while it's also regulating passing of food through the digestive system, and we can now look at how that can practically improve our outcomes as we care about, the outcomes we care about as athletes. Number one is better recovery and training adaptations. We know that intense training creates short-term inflammation in the body. This is completely natural, and it's part of what signals the body to adapt to the training that we're doing. But if that inflammation is high on an ongoing basis, it impairs the body's ability to recover and adapt. The short-chain fatty acids mentioned earlier that are produced when the gut bacteria ferment fiber, they have direct anti-inflammatory effects throughout the body. They also actually improve the integrity of the gut lining itself, which means fewer inflammatory compounds like undigested food particles, bacterial endotoxins, and pathogenic bacteria get into the bloodstream from the digestive system. Both these effects mean more of the body's resources can go towards recovery and other processes involved in training adaptations rather than towards managing the unnecessary inflammation that may otherwise be going on. So practically speaking, that could mean faster recovery, getting greater benefit from each training session you're doing, and being able to handle higher training volumes over time. Number two then is reduced cravings and hunger. Many athletes struggle with hunger, particularly during high training volumes or especially when trying to reduce body fat. And high fiber foods increase satiety through several mechanisms. Firstly, they take longer to actually eat and to pass through the stomach, which allows more time for those satiety hormones to be released. They also fill up the stomach more mechanically, triggering an increase in the release of these satiety hormones. As well as that, the short-chain fatty acids produced from fiber fermentation can have a longer-term effect of directly influencing appetite centers in the brain, reducing cravings and impulsive eating on an ongoing basis. They do all of this whilst also being lower in caloric content than most other foods, which can mean being able to eat more food volume without adding additional calories. Number 3 then is increased nutrient absorption. So I've already mentioned how fibre can help slow down the transit of food through the digestive system. And when taken to the extreme, this can mean constipation and the negative effects associated with that, namely discomfort and potential for toxin reabsorption that can come along with that. However, this generally will only occur when you increase fibre too quickly relative to your baseline intake. But when done gradually, this slows down the transit of food to a speed that allows the body to take sufficient time to break down and absorb the nutrients in the food. As well as that, the short-chain fatty acids nourish the cells in the gut that are responsible for the absorption of nutrients. As well as that, again, the gut bacteria themselves can produce vitamins like vitamin K2 and B vitamins as part of the fibre fermentation process. And all of this together means that by consuming sufficient fibre, you increase the absorption and the potential benefits you get from the foods and supplements and things like that you are consuming in pursuit of your athletic goals. Number 4 then is more stable energy levels. Your blood glucose or blood sugar levels fluctuate throughout the day. You might want to increase them during athletic activities to increase the glucose supply to the muscles, but you might not want a big spike in your blood sugar during the workday, for example, where it can be followed by a dip leading to what you might feel as an energy crash. You might also experience a dip in blood glucose as a result of having spent too long without eating, as well as that physical activity itself can also have an effect. Now, these large fluctuations that can happen in blood sugar can lead to unpredictable energy levels, both in everyday life, in and out of training. Sufficient fibre intake can help reduce these fluctuations. So firstly, fibre slows down the actual carbohydrate absorption, resulting in glucose gradually entering the blood rather than it entering it quickly. This can help avoid those rapid spikes and potential subsequent crash. But fibre also has the longer term effect of increasing what's known as insulin sensitivity, which means that the blood glucose that is getting into the blood, as that increases, the body is able to move it more quickly into the muscles. So for athletes, all of this means is more efficient distribution of the carbohydrates you're consuming in preparation for training and competition, and more stable energy levels throughout the day and in training or competition. Number 5 then is improved digestive function. So as I've already mentioned, one of fibre's most fundamental roles is in maintaining healthy bowel movements. Insoluble fibre adds bulk to the stool and helps move food through the digestive tract at an optimal pace, preventing constipation and ensuring waste products are eliminated efficiently. And for athletes, this matters probably more than you might think. So for example, constipation can cause abdominal discomfort, bloating, and a general feeling of sluggishness that can interfere with your training quality. And you may have experienced this if you've ever gone out to train with a dodgy stomach. As well as that, when waste products remain in the digestive system for too long, there's a potential for a reabsorption of the toxins and metabolic waste products that should be eliminated. So regular, comfortable bowel movements, typically once or twice daily, indicate a well-functioning digestive system. Adequate fibre intake combined with proper hydration, etc., is the most reliable way to maintain this regularity. Number 6 then is less time getting sick. We know that exercise enhances immunity over the long term, which is great for athletes. However, we also know that athletes have to contend with the fact that intense training can temporarily suppress the immune system. You also have the issue in team sports where there is a lot of close contact with other athletes, as well as shared spaces like changing rooms and sometimes even shared objects like water bottles, gym equipment, and towels. Fibre intake is one way of modulating this immune challenge through several mechanisms. We already talked about the short-chain fatty acids produced from fibre fermentation, and these strengthen the gut lining and the gut barrier, which prevents pathogens from getting into the bloodstream, things that would cause sickness otherwise. Along with that, 70 to 80% of the body's immune cells are actually created within the gut, and these short-chain fatty acids that come from fermentation of fibre are critical to the production of these immune cells themselves. And even practical research backs this up, where athletes with a higher fibre intake experience fewer upper respiratory infections and recover more quickly from illness when it does occur. This is a significant performance advantage given how easily training can be disrupted by even small illnesses. And I always like the phrase, your best ability is availability. Number 7, decreased long-term risk of disease. So whilst immediate performance benefits are obviously important, athletes should also consider their long-term health beyond just their competitive years. And high fiber intake is one of the most consistently protective dietary factors across numerous health outcomes. Higher fiber consumption is associated with reduced cardiovascular disease, reduced type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, particularly colorectal cancer, and general all-cause mortality. So for athletes, investing significant time and effort into their physical development, ensuring this investment translates into long-term health and not just short-term performance, should probably be a priority. Now, the mechanisms behind these protective effects include things like improved metabolic health, reduced chronic inflammation, better weight management, enhanced gut barrier function. So we now want to look at how to actually optimize your fiber intake as an athlete. And if you've been convinced, hopefully, of the value of assessing your fiber intake by listening to this, you'd probably be wanting to know about how to go about actually optimizing how much you should be getting in. And the current general population recommendations suggest somewhere between 25 and 40 grams of fiber per day, whilst the actual average intake ranges from somewhere in the range of 15 to 25 grams per day. So this should tell you that most people are actually under consuming fiber. And there's also a good argument to say that athletes may actually require more fiber intake than general populations. Given the increased overall food intake requirements that they have, and given the increased inflammation that they will be experiencing from the training process itself. But given that even the general population levels are above what most people would usually consume, my recommendation for most people is to simply start consuming more fiber than you currently do. In terms of actual targets, I usually just recommend building that up towards the 40 gram target gradually. I say building up gradually because increasing fiber intake too quickly can lead to unwanted consequences like gas, bloating, and digestive discomfort. So we almost have to train the gut to handle more fiber. In terms of then the sources we want to get them from, fiber will generally come from things like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seed, legumes, and whole grains. And these are food sources that athletes will often neglect in favor of, say, protein intake and higher carbohydrate intake, both of which are good. But hopefully you've been somewhat convinced that starting to include more fiber, now knowing the benefits of doing so, will be beneficial for you. And if that is the case, here I'll give a list of some of the recommended fiber sources worth starting to implement. So we're talking about things like legumes that can include things like lentils, chickpeas, black beans, kidney beans. We're talking about things like whole grains that are like oats, quinoa or brown rice or whole wheat pasta, for example. Then obviously things like vegetables, usual vegetables, broccoli, cabbage, sprouts, carrots, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes. You also have fruits. We're talking things like our raspberries, our pears, our apples, bananas, etc. Then we have our nuts and seeds. We're talking things like chia seeds, flax seeds, almonds, cashews. And then we have other things like avocados, dark leafy greens, etc. I also want to give a final note on timing, because I want to save you some potentially disastrous trial and error by talking about how you can time your fiber intake around the training sessions that you're doing. So you recognize the issue with fiber intake if you've ever gone out to training immediately after a very high fiber meal. Things like bloating, stomach cramping, and urgent bowel movements can follow as a result of that. And at best, this means suboptimal performance and feeling a bit sluggish. But at worst, it means running off the field halfway through a training session trying to make it to the toilet on time. And the solution obviously isn't to avoid fiber based on what we've talked about already, but to be strategic about the timing of it. That means pre-training, choosing lower fiber, easily digestible carbohydrate sources like white rice, potatoes, white bread-based foods with moderate protein and minimal fats and fiber. Post-training can be a great time to get in some fiber, knowing it will be a while until your next session, albeit you might not feel like eating large volumes of food and therefore large volumes of fiber after a training session. And in that case, emphasizing your fiber intake in your meals furthest away from training, say on the morning of an evening session, and particularly on non-training days, is going to allow you to get in the optimal amounts whilst avoiding the downsides of high fiber intake around the training window. Thanks for listening. If you'd like more free resources or info about my performance nutrition coaching program, hit the link in the podcast description.